This Beef Market Update podcast is brought to you by Brett Young. You treat them like family, feed them like family. Talk to your retailer about Brett Young's forage and corn options for a happy, healthy herd or visit brettyoung.ca.
Let's get to the Beef Market Update with Ann Wasko with the Gateway Livestock Exchange. And nothing to talk about today.
No, absolutely nothing. Good day, Sean.
Okay, now we have seen quite the run in prices. Last week I wrote about the cattle on feed report and getting over the live cattle futures in the near months over $200 for fat cattle in the futures market. What happened this week from a cash perspective?
Well, for some futures continued that run earlier this week. Now they've certainly set back, but what a run it has been. So the last couple of days futures have been off, but cash cattle in the south, of course, had to catch up to what happened in the north last week. So Texas and Kansas this week were 208 on the live market. So compared to where they traded early last week, that's $6 higher for the most part. That's kind of where Nebraska got to at the end of the week. So Nebraska's trading 330 delivered at my last look, which would be called steady with last week. So what an amazing run. And this has been cash led. Futures have been falling. So that's one of kind of the strongest signs of a solid market. Now, the cutout did show signs of weakening here in the second half of the week. It closed last night at 327.5 on the choice, $3.5 lower. Select's back about 1160. So, bit not surprising seasonally, not surprising from the fact that it's made this massive run at a time when you wouldn't normally see wholesale prices as strong as they've been. So those things aren't that unexpected, if you will. Now, cash markets in Alberta also had some catch up to do. Yes, they've been moving higher, but basis has still remained really wide, really weak. So cash cattle in Alberta this week were 460 delivered dressed. That's going to be called 10 to 15 higher on the dress basis. But again, needed to catch up a little bit from a basis perspective. Last week, spot basis was $35 back of the U.S. and to the nearby live cattle, it was $20 back. So we needed to narrow those gains a little bit. Now, we've got some reports coming up. If you want to talk about those right now, we do have the U.S. cattle inventory report for January 1. They didn't have one, if you recall, last summer, Sean, because they had budget cutbacks, USDA did. So we haven't had one of these reports since last January. So this is the one that'll go through, and this comes out this afternoon. It'll go through all the various classes of cattle, but I'll give you just some of the key trade guesses that I'll be watching. So all cattle and calves, everything. Industry analysts are calling it down 1%. The calf crop, they're calling down 1.5%. If that were to come true, just to put it in perspective, that would be the smallest calf crops in the U.S. since 1940.
Wow.
Yeah. Beef cows expecting down 1%. And beef replacements, heifers, they're expecting up 1%, but it's interesting because there's several analysts that take part in this survey from a guess perspective, and some are expecting lower, some are expecting higher. So there's not consensus from the trade in terms of what's happening with replacement heifers. Now, you talked last week about the on-feed report for the U.S. For January 1, and it just, again, continues to show numbers awfully similar to a year ago. On-feed numbers were down 1%. But we did see that December placements down 3%, likely still had a lot to do with, remember, the Mexican border is still closed for feeder cattle imports into the U.S. because of the screwworm issue. And so that affected December, and it's still closed today. So I expect when we do see next month's cattle on feed report for the U.S., we will also see January placements impacted still by the fact that we haven't got Mexican feeder cattle coming north. So that's coming out later today, something to watch for.
Yeah. So we're also going to have an update, I believe, from President Sheinbaum in Mexico about giving an update on the screwworm situation. There's still there has to be an impact here on Mexican feeder cattle not coming into states like, into the U.S., but impacting states like Nebraska and Texas. What are you hearing from people south of the border on that one?
Well, certainly, I guess the question now going forward is most were expecting it not to last too terribly long
Yeah.
into January. So I guess if we don't see something changing, and I am hearing that we will see, and it'll be interesting to see what is said in that update today. But how much longer will it be? So I think up until now, the industry's kind of dealt with it. The Mexican cattle have kind of just stayed where they were. But now it's starting to dig into, okay, we thought this would be open by now. So if it carries on much longer, I think there's more impactful. We've seen it impact the placement numbers already in Texas and Kansas, December and January. They'll catch up if it opens soon. If it doesn't, then we have another discussion about, some significant changes on the supply side.
Yeah, if some of those cattle that were intended to come north are now on feed, you got to wonder, will they actually come north, and will it leave some of those pens empty?
Various opinions there, Sean. Some just saying they're still staying out, on pasture, if you will, and they just stay there until they, so it's not as, if we were exporting feeder cattle from Canada, it would be a different deal because they would be in feedlots. So this, I think, situations may be a little bit different in terms of they're still out at pasture at grass. Yeah.
And of course, at the time of recording this, and I give that update because it's a fast-moving environment, there is an expectation that there's going to be a 25% tariff on Canadian exports. Now, a lot of talk is about, will there be a cutout for Canadian energy? Nobody's talking about any sort of an exemption for beef or cattle. So if these tariffs are put in place on Saturday, February 1st, then that is going to be a big shakeup on these markets. We don't know what we don't know. What is actually going to happen? But what are some things to look out for? What could be some of the potential impacts?
Well, two things. Well, first of all, lots of things. I shouldn't say two things. I was going to mention two things, but there's lots of things going on. We talked before we got on the call, of course, about the Canadian dollar, and it has been sensing tariffs since the initial word was thrown out back last fall. But even here this morning, we've got the March dollar, and again, was coming down as I got on the call here, but 68.85. Yeah. That's down a full cent even just from last Friday. So, the dollar has certainly been moving. That, of course, over the last 2 or 3 months has been very supportive to Canadian cattle prices. But now, of course, I suspect it's starting to really look at the impacts of tariffs, and that's therefore the weakness. So we'll see what happens. That's one thing. The other thing that's been interesting to watch, Sean, in Western Canada for sure, has been producers have been marketing cattle. They've been, selling early. Our auction market volumes in Alberta in January are huge. We had another 42,000 had moved through Alberta markets last week. That was following a 46,000 had one the week before that. If it's another big week this week when the numbers come in, and it will be, we could be up as much as 50 to 54% from last January just in what's moving. So producers are doing what they can to get ahead of what might or might not happen, that unknown. And I suspect, I don't know for sure from livestock price insurance, but I suspect there's been a lot of activity in terms of buying price insurance for the rest of this year.
Yeah. Like Canadian, is that corn price creeps up and the Canadian dollar creeps down, cost of feed going up for Canadian feed yards that are feeding corn.
That are bringing in U.S. corn. Yeah. So there can be so many things change, Sean, and I guess we'll hear more in probably less than 24 hours.
I feel like it's a working weekend. I just have this feeling it's a working weekend.
I think you better get ready for it. And I know I'm going to see Lindsay down at NCBA in San Antonio next week, so that'll be good to catch up with her. Sorry, we're going to miss you, but yeah, it'll be interesting to be in the midst of the U.S. Cattlemen's meeting.
You think?
NCBA. It'll be very interesting. Really, of course, my highlight of course, the Cattle Facts Outlook session, which is next Thursday. So
it's always a highlight. CattleCon is one of my favorite meetings to go to. So many friends in that media room and the industry, and honestly, NCBA truly does make it just a great opportunity to get the insights of so many people across the cattle sector, not only their staff, but the entire industry. So Lindsay's going to be there. She's going to have a great time. You make sure, Ann, You do not lead her astray and end up at Howl at the Moon or
heavens, no.
Riverwalk in the
Heavens.
middle. Yeah, she has work to do. You do not lead that woman astray. I've left her in the hands of somebody I'm not sure I should have. I can.
What happens in San Antonio?
Well, y'all have a good time. And thanks so much for joining us here. Have a great time at CattleCon down there in San Antonio, Texas, and we'll talk to you in a couple weeks.
Okay, thanks, Sean.
Thank you for downloading this episode of the Beef Market Update, brought to you by Brett Young. Check out their silage and grazing corn stock blends or custom build your own mix for a happy, healthy herd. Talk to your retailer or visit brettyoung.ca today.